Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and I'm looking forward to this to speaking on vote education tonight. One of the most important votes in this year's budget, as it is in any budget, because it is where we think about the future, we think about the legacy that we will leave for future generations of New Zealanders, and I have to say, Mr Chair, that in that regard, this current government's priorities in education have been woefully inadequate and completely wrong. Mr Chair, the education portfolio starts in early childhood education. And in fact, if we want to ensure that every young New Zealander gets the best chance in life through education, it starts with a quality early childhood education. That means investing in quality, investing in making sure that we have really good teachers in early childhood education, really good centres, that all of those centres are well supported, and this government haven't been doing that. If there is one area which is the clearest example of how government funding isn't keeping up with increased demand, isn't keeping up with the cost pressures that centres are facing, it is early childhood education. Government funding simply isn't keeping up. Every early childhood centre will tell Tim McIndoe, who's got his head in the sand, that on a per child basis, early childhood education funding is declining under this government. It is declining under this government, and they have their heads buried in the sand. They simply don't want to know. And so parents are having to pay more for early childhood education. Of course, they did away with the free early childhood education, so it's not surprising that parents are having to pay more. They have failed to keep up with the targets to increase the number of qualified staff in early childhood education, and their idea of expanding provision is to go along to Kitty Corp and basically say we'll fund you twice for building the same early childhood centres. This is a government that are failing to meet the needs of the future in early childhood education. In schooling, we know what the challenges are. Quality teaching. We should be backing quality teaching, professional development for teachers, and we need a high trust, aspirational model for the way we do that. This government have no trust in teachers. They say to parents, teachers cannot be trusted, and we've got a power grab from the Minister of Education who wants to wrench control of all of the entire teaching profession and put them under her thumb by not even giving them any say over how their own profession is regulated. This is a government that think that bigger class sizes is the solution to underachievement in the education system. This is a government that thinks that charter schools, importing a failed charter school model from overseas, is an answer to underachievement in our education system, and we know that that is simply not the case. We know that's not the case. This is a government, of course, that think that spending up to 5 times more money on a handful of students going to charter schools is a good use of public money when every other school in the country is struggling for resources. We know that they're struggling for resources because donations by parents to New Zealand's public schools have now topped or are about to top $100 million a year. That's a 30% increase since National, in the 5 years that National has been in government, a 30% increase. And the reality is that's because when it's adjusted for population growth and for inflation, the overall education budget has gone backwards 4 out of the 6 years that National has been in office. Money has gone backwards. They've been taking money out of education. Yes, the overall amount of money has gone up, but that's because the number of people in the education system have gone up, and because, like everything, the costs go up. Inflation, it's called inflation, and it seems to me that this government seems to struggle with that. To say that they're spending more money on education than ever before is ridiculous, because actually there are more people in the education system than ever before because the population has grown. So it stands to reason that more money will be going into the system. But on a per student basis, it's going backwards. On a per student basis, the funding is going backwards in the education system. It is simply not keeping up with inflation and with the growing population. Instead, we're seeing the government trying to carve the education system up and through privatisation, through the introduction of charter schools, public-private partnerships, and in the meantime they are ignoring the needs of the future. They're failing to help the education system and to support the education system adapt to the needs of the 21st century. Instead, they're continuing to refine an education system that we needed in the last century. We actually need something different now. As Alvin Toffler said, the new illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn and relearn. And actually, that's what schools are focused on. They are focused on giving the kids the knowledge, the competencies that they are going to need, Mr Chair, the Honourable Member, that they are going to need to survive in the 21st century, and yet so much government policy is getting in the way of that. A narrowing of the focus of the curriculum. That has been one of the worst things that this government have done in education, is to narrow the focus of the curriculum away from a rich, diverse education down to something that simply isn't going to cut it. When I go and talk to employers, I say, what do you want people leaving school with what are the competencies that you're looking for? They talk about creativity. They talk about collaboration. They talk about problem solving. And yet all of those things are being distracted from by this government's very narrow focus. They're very narrow focus of this current government. And of course, what have we seen? What the litany of failures in this government's education policy. School closures in Christchurch, closing special education schools around the country, Nova Pay, Hiki Parata's bizarre plan to increase class sizes supposedly to improve the quality of education. There is a better way. There is a better way in all of these areas. Positive progressive change in education is what I think New Zealanders are looking for, and I think that's what they're going to get when they vote for a Labour government, a Labour-led government at this year's election, because we will put the focus on quality teaching, but not in the way this national government want to, which is to divide the teaching profession, to tell the teaching profession that they know best and try and tell every teacher in the country that they know better how they should be doing their jobs. Not that way. We're actually going to place some trust in teachers. We're actually going to say to teachers, we think it's fantastic that they have an aspirational code of ethics for their profession rather than a punitive code of conduct like this government want to. We're going to say to teachers, actually, we trust you to have a say over how your profession is regulated and governed, and so we're going to give teachers a say in how the Teachers' Council is composed, unlike under this national government where Hiki Parata wants to handpick every single member of the Education Council because she won't trust teachers to have a say over their own profession. We are going to say to parents, we recognise the economic pressures that you are under, and we recognise the fact that funding has not kept up with the cost of educating kids. And we will do something about that. Unlike this government who are saying, in the words of Bill English, that schools are awash with cash, we know that's simply not the case, and in fact funding's not keeping up under this government, and that is something that the incoming Labour government will do something about as a matter of priority. We recognise that education in the 21st century is going to look significantly different to what it looked like in the 20th century. That means that schools are going to need access to new technology, kids are going to need access to new technology, and while the current government, and I'll give them credit, this is an area where they have done some good things, and we fully support the initiatives that they have put in place in this area, but a lot more needs to be done, and it will be done under a Labour government. And we'll have some more announcements to make on that very, very soon, as you'll see over the coming couple of days. Because investment in education is an investment in the future of the country. It may sound like a cliche, it's been said so many times, but this government don't seem to acknowledge that. They seem to think that the education system can continue to scrape by with less and less on a per-student basis in real terms every year. It simply can't. The funding isn't keeping up with the cost of educating kids, and the government have got their heads buried in the sand if they think it is. It simply isn't. So the Labour Party and the next Labour government, we will invest in quality teaching. We will set very high standards with the teaching profession, in collaboration with them, set very high standards for the profession. We will make sure that we attract the best and brightest into teaching because we know how valuable the work of teachers is, and we will then place trust in them to get on with it and to do the job without all of the punitive measures and sanctions that this government are putting in place. We will commit to the free public education system that New Zealanders have so long been proud of, and we will put the public and the free back into the free public education that this government is so determined to dismantle. And we will make sure that schools are supported to deliver an education that is appropriate for the 21st century. We will ensure that kids get access to the technology that they need, and that it shouldn't be a lottery of where they're born and how wealthy their parents are to make sure they get access to that technology. Every student needs to have access to the technology they need to thrive in the 21st century, and the Labour Party, the incoming Labour government, will make sure that they get that. The education is so important. It's time for positive change in education, positive investment in education, and that is exactly what New Zealand is going to get from an incoming Labour government.
Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Minister Nikki Kaye.
Mr Chair, I'm very pleased to speak in this estimates debate. The reason I'm very pleased